For over a century, the Michelin Guide has been regarded as the pinnacle of culinary achievement. Earning 1, 2, or 3 Michelin stars is often seen as the defining mark of a chef's career. But what if I told you that those shiny little stars, the ones the chefs kill themselves to get, actually become more of a curse than a blessing? The Michelin Guide began in the year 1900 as a way for French brothers Andrew and Edouard Michelin, founders of the Michelin Tire Company, to encourage car travel and essentially sell more tires. They published a free travel guide, and by the 1920s, the restaurant section became so popular that the brothers introduced a 1-star rating system in 1926. This then later expanded into the current 3-star system by 1931, using anonymous inspectors to evaluate restaurants. But it wasn't until 1936 that the actual criteria for the rankings were finally published, with 1 star equating to being considered a very good restaurant in its category, 2 stars being excellent cooking, worth a detour, and 3 stars being exceptional cuisine worth a special journey. According to Michelin, in order for an award, they take into account 5 universal criteria: the quality of ingredients, the harmony of flavors, the mastery of techniques, the personality of the chef as expressed through their cuisine, and, just as importantly, consistency both across the entire menu and over time. For decades, this system carried an almost religious authority over the industry. Chefs would devote their entire lives to chasing stars, standing at their station night after night, executing consistently perfect meals, all for an anonymous inspector to come in camouflaged at any point among normal patrons and make or break their careers. To be included in the Michelin Guide meant prestige, packed dining rooms, and global acclaim. But as the culinary world evolved, cracks have begun to fracture Michelin's once impeccable reputation, with some of the world's greatest culinary wizards throwing their stars back in the face of the pompous tastemakers who made them. For what is considered the ultimate dream for a chef, for many turned into a nightmare. At the ripe age of 23, Marco Pierre opened his own restaurant called Harvey's in London, to great success. So much so that he received his first Michelin star soon after the restaurant's opening, and another star a year later. By 1995, Marco Pierre became the first British chef and youngest chef to ever be awarded 3 Michelin stars, all while he was just 33 years old. He was hailed as a culinary genius and became the godfather of modern celebrity chefs. He also mentored the next generation of world-class chefs like Gordon Ramsay and Heston Blumenthal. If you're interested, I have actually made a video about Ramsay's entire mentorship under Marco. It's probably one of the best videos I've made on this channel, so you should definitely check it out. And while you're there, you may as well subscribe, because I make these videos weekly. Well, just about. Anyway, back to the video. In 1992, just when Marco's career was at its peak, he did something that no chef ever had the balls to do before. He became the first chef in history to give back all 3 Michelin stars, giving a big double-fingered fuck you to the institution that dishes out status. And his reasoning was quite simple.
I thought to myself, I've really got 3 options. My first option was to continue doing what I'm doing, 6 days a week, 80 to 90 hours a week, being behind my stove. That's where I belonged, because I believe you're going to charge high prices, you have 3 stars in Michelin, you've got to be behind your stove. That's what I believed. My second option was to live a lie, to pretend I cook when I don't cook, continue to charge high prices, question my own integrity and everything that I've ever worked for.
Gordon Ramsay you're describing here, yes?
I'm just giving you a little bit of clarity.
Okay.
My third option was pluck up the courage, let the Michelin know that on the 23rd of December 1999 that I will be hanging up my apron and retiring. They were my 3 options. One day, I was on the riverbank one Sunday afternoon, and this little thought came into my head. And that thought was, Marco, you're being judged by people who have less knowledge than you. So I thought to myself, so what's it all worth? What have I worked all these years for? It was that gave me the courage and the strength to hang up my apron and accept that tomorrow morning I've lost my status and I'm unemployed.
In other words, his own understanding and appreciation for the art of cooking was worth more to him than what was perceived as a prestigious award. The stars basically became shackles rather than laurels. Once the stars have been attained, they've got to be preserved at any cost. Every dish, every service, every staff change carried the risk of losing a star. By giving them back, White essentially freed himself from Michelin's grip and liberated his approach to cooking. But what made this move so truly epic is the fact that Marco giving away the stars didn't impact his reputation one bit. Instead, this stunt actually shook people's faith in the Michelin group.
There's a great book called Au revoir by the American journalist called Bernstein. And there's also the book by Benoit Loiseau. And if you read what the old inspectors of Michelin said within those 2 books, and then you listen to the modern day Michelin inspector, they're worlds apart. The great man Michelin Mr. Brown, who was then Inspector of England and then became the head inspector of France, what you had to do was prove consistency over many years before they dished out the stars. They had to believe in you. And secondly, you had to be behind your stove. They would never give 3 stars to a chef who wasn't behind his stove. As I say, today, in my opinion, they dish out stars like confetti.
You see, if you're aiming for Michelin stars, you have to understand that you're playing a game. There are specifics they're looking for, and if you're not consistently perfect, the tire company will knock you off your pedestal. In 2013, Gordon Ramsay's restaurants in New York and London both lost their stars in a single blow, apparently marking the first time in history a restaurant had gone from 2 stars to 0 stars because of quality issues. In an interview, Ramsay said, "I started crying when I lost my stars. It's a very emotional thing for any chef. It's like losing a girlfriend. You want her back." So this clearly shows that the stars aren't just professional accolades. They become intertwined with the chef's sense of identity and worth. But like Marco said, Ramsay wasn't behind his stove at those restaurants. So it's hard to argue that there isn't some kind of decline in the way these stars are being dished out, especially to higher profile chefs. Celebrity chef Mario Carbone, who once held a Michelin star between 2013 and 2022, spoke on the Flagrant podcast about how the business model of Michelin makes chefs fall into one of 2 categories.
There's a lot to unpack with Michelin. Michelin started as a subsidy for the tire company. Now it's no longer. So now it's a business. So I think you got to take that with a grain of salt. They're in their own business of selling books. Michelin's tricky for a lot of reasons. If you're to the restaurant, the kind of restaurant you're talking about, they're going for that accolade. There's this sort of assumption that you have to do it in a really tight way, a really, library style, hush environment, very sort of the chef is right. He wants you to eat this from the left to the right sort of environment because they're coveting these stars.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a good business model. We are the opposite, right?
Yes.
I think that chefs, well-trained, high-level chefs, fall in one of 2 categories, and we're firmly on one side than the other. There's 2 categories. Not that there's anything wrong with the 2 categories, but there's 2 firm categories. One category is the chef that spends all their training, all their work, their life's journey to make something that you've never had before. That's a very dangerous proposition.
Yeah.
But if you have whatever this thing is and you don't like it, the chef can at least fall back on the ego and say, you don't get it. You didn't get what I was going for.
This is the pretentiousness.
Yeah, and that
You didn't get it. And I preach to my team and my chefs, we're on the other side of that. We are equally dangerous. We are trying to make for you the thing that you've had thousands of times before. And I want to make one of the best ones you've ever had. But you know exactly what it's like. So I can't be like, oh, he didn't get that meatball.
You're competing with their grandma.
You know what a meatball is, right?
Yeah.
You may not know what that chef was trying to go for, but like if you didn't like it, it's probably not good.
Yeah. You don't have that fallback.
But if I win, I've got a customer for life. I've got someone who's coming multiple times a week. If that chef wins, you may go once a year. You may actually never go back again.
But even if you are a chef who is constantly behind their stove and has dedicated their life to the craft, it can become a curse rather than a blessing. Few restaurants have achieved the mythical status of Jiro Sushi in Tokyo. In 2007, the restaurant received its 3 Michelin stars after over 42 years of service, following the debut of the Michelin's Tokyo Guide. In fact, the Tokyo Guide that year was awarded the most stars out of anywhere, and in 2010, other Japanese cities like Kyoto and Osaka also received many stars, which led some to question if the high ratings were actually merited, or whether Michelin were just trying to gain acceptance with Japanese customers and allow Michelin tires to market itself in Japan. Other people argued that this was just because restaurants were a different level in Japan. Tokyo apparently has over 160,000 restaurants, while Paris has just 40,000. But Jiro's restaurant was made truly famous by the 2011 documentary Jiro Dreams of Sushi. The film followed the legendary chef of the restaurant, Jiro Uno, who at that point was in his 80s. The 10-seat sushi counter attracted pilgrims from across the globe and was celebrated worldwide as the pinnacle of sushi artistry. The restaurant maintained all 3 Michelin stars for years. However, in 2019, Michelin stripped Jiro of all its stars. This wasn't because of a decline in quality, but because it wasn't accessible to the public. You see, after the documentary, demands for seats exploded. As a result, they ceased taking reservations altogether. You couldn't just walk in or make a reservation to eat there. The only way to get a seat was if concierge at the nearby high-end hotels vouched for you. But Michelin's decision to remove the restaurant kind of illustrated the absurdity of their rules. How could a restaurant that is universally recognized as one of the best in the world be erased from the guide, not due to its food, but due to its exclusivity? And Michelin's decision to remove the restaurant was probably water off a duck's back for Jiro, but it kind of reinforced that the stars aren't a definitive measure of culinary greatness they once were. But no story illustrates the darker side of winning Michelin stars more tragically differently than the iconic French chef Benoit Loiseau. It was Benoit's life ambition to become a 3-star Michelin chef, a goal he finally achieved in 1991 after 17 years of blood, sweat and tears. He became a household name in France, appearing on TV and authoring numerous cookbooks. His life even loosely inspired the film Ratatouille, with elements of the character Gusteau being taken from Benoit, with the director Brad Bird visiting La Côte d'Or during the conception of the film. However, by 2003, rumours began circulating that Benoit was in danger of losing a star. Despite apparent reassurances from Michelin's higher-ups, the pressure proved unbearable. At the age of just 52, Benoit took his own life. After his death, his wife claimed that he had financial struggles and clinical depression. Fellow chef and friend Jacques Lamoise said that Benoit had once confided, "If I lose a star, I'll kill myself." Before Benoit's death, the French restaurant guide Carbone had recently downgraded his restaurant from 1920 to 1720, which led to rumours in French newspapers that the Michelin guide was planning to remove one of his restaurants' 3 stars. At the time and to this day, Michelin have denied rumours that they had threatened Loiseau with losing a star, stating, "We never had any problem with Benoit Loiseau, just some details like the temperature of the soup." At the time, legendary chef Paul Bocuse blamed the French food guide, stating, "Bravo, your verdict cost a man's life. We cannot let ourselves be manipulated like this. I'll give you a star, I'll take one away. I'll award you 2 points, I'll deduct them. The profession will respond." However, Benoit never did actually lose his 3 stars. In fact, his wife and daughters managed to honour Benoit's legacy by maintaining the restaurant's 3-star status well beyond his death. Sadly, this isn't a one-off in the high-end culinary world either. In 2016, French-Swiss chef Violier committed the same fate. He was even due to attend the launch of the new Michelin guide in Paris the next day before his death. To many, it came as a complete shock, as his 3-starred restaurant in Switzerland, which translated to English means the City Hall restaurant, had been crowned by the French government as the best restaurant in the world the month before, and subsequently had people claiming him to be the best chef in the world. But his passing also once again began to raise questions around the crushing burden Michelin stars carry. In 2019, another legendary chef, Marc Veyrat, who throughout his career won 9 Michelin stars, had one of his restaurants downgraded from 3 to 2, mainly because of a cheese souffle, which to Michelin critics claimed contained cheddar cheese. In response to finding out about his downgrade, he wrote a letter back explaining that he only used a mix of regional cheeses and not cheddar. "I put saffron in it, and the gentleman who came thought it was cheddar because it was yellow. That's what you call knowledge of a place. It's just crazy." Marc described the loss of a star as worse than a wound and profoundly offensive, and said that it gave him depression. In July, of months of what he described as depression and amateur inspection, Veyrat wrote to Michelin demanding that his restaurant be removed from the guide altogether, and denouncing inspectors' quote, "profound incompetence. They dared to say that we put cheddar in our souffle of Rubicon, Blueford and Tom. They've insulted our region. My employees were furious." In the same month, Michelin replied in a statement from the international director, stating, "We are not removing the restaurant from the Michelin guide. If the institution remains open and our inspectors evaluate the table, we will continue to recommend it." As a result, Marc even took the Michelin guide to court in the hopes that suing would force the Michelin to hand over documents to clarify the exact reason of the justification of its decision. The case became known as Cheddargate, with Michelin pushing back hard, framing the lawsuit as an attack on critics' freedom of expression. The night before the hearing, the Michelin camp apparently labelled Veyrat as a narcissistic diva with a pathological egotism, and sought €30,000 in a countersuit for costs and compensation. Ultimately, Marc lost, with the court finding out that no proven damage was caused by the downgrade. But the case wasn't about getting damages, but transparency for the way these awards are graded. For Michelin, the secrecy of its inspections is what adds to the allure. But after getting scarred from Michelin on a public stage, in January 2025, the chef banned Michelin inspectors from ever entering his new restaurant. So how do you actually become a Michelin inspector to dictate what is good and what isn't? Well, inspectors are usually recruited from people with deep backgrounds in food, like former chefs, critics, and hospitality professionals. Once recruited, they'll undergo months of training, shadowing experienced inspectors until they can replicate Michelin standards with consistency. One of these inspectors was called Pascal Remy, a food connoisseur who dined across France for Michelin for 16 years. In December 2003, he was fired by Michelin because he was going to write a a book around his diary entries from his time as an inspector. However, Michelin claimed that this would breach his confidentiality and his contract by wanting to publish. Remy brought the lawsuit against them for wrongful dismissal, but the court rejected it. Despite this, Pascal released his book in 2004 called Sits Down at the Table. The book exposed a whole number of things from the life of an inspector, calling it a lonely and stressful job, dining alone and under pressure to write detailed reports. According to Pascal, when he was hired in 1988, there were about 11 full-time inspectors in France, and by the time he was dismissed, that number had dropped to 5. Those 5 inspectors were apparently responsible for visiting 10,000 restaurants yearly in France. And you may be wondering, how the fuck is that possible? Well, again, according to Pascal, it wasn't. Apparently most restaurants aren't visited every year, sometimes every 2 or 3.5 years. Remy also claimed that of the 27 French restaurants that were holding 3 Michelin stars at the time, weren't meeting the standards as expected, asserting that some restaurants were basically untouchable because of prestige, influence or reputation, even if they had become a slot fest. Michelin heavily denied any of the things mentioned in the book. However, it does raise the question, if Michelin are adding more and more restaurants every year across the globe, how do they maintain the standards across the increased number of restaurants that are in the guide? Governments pay millions to bring the Michelin guide to their cities and get coverage. So what are they going to do if there's grim food in the city that's paid them to be there? I mean, surely they're just going to lower the standards and dish out stars so they can justify the guide being in the city.
When you're given an award by people who have less knowledge, what is it worth? 0.
Back in the day, the Michelin Guide once stood for being the gold standard of culinary excellence, but as we've discovered, when awarded these stars, a lot of times it actually restricts creativity, customers expect a spectacle, and losing stars has a significant impact on the business. The truth is, Michelin stars are probably never going away, but it is an outdated system that has ruined lives and created an incredible amount of stress for the people who've won them. But let's be honest, the world has moved on. Diners don't need an outdated French tire company to tell them where to eat anymore. With social media or even just word of mouth, people decide themselves what makes a restaurant worth the journey. In fact, here in the UK, people queue for blocks to get baked potatoes from a TikToker. So while these stars still hold authority, they're no longer really the real definitive measure of greatness. Thank you for watching, it really does mean a lot to me. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to the channel for weekly videos, and follow me on all of my socials at Phat Network.